It's all in that one little sentence that James Comey recalls from a February 14th conversation with Donald Trump at the White House. I hope you can see your way clear to letting this go, he quotes the president as saying, to letting Flynn go. Flynn being the national security advisor. He's a good guy. I hope you can let this go. Did the president of the United States of America pressure the director of the FBI to put his personal reputation ahead of national security? Did Donald Trump know what he was saying when he exchanged with James Comey on February 14th about his national security advisor's ties to Russia? Is this, as Barack Obama's head of national intelligence said this week, bigger than Watergate? The entire planet's been riveted this Thursday to the hearings in the U.S. Senate, where to the point where we have to remind ourselves that this isn't some Emmy-winning television series, but real life, that the current crisis impacts not just the U.S. government and its intelligence agencies, but the whole world, what with U.S. diplomacy and military strategy impacted by the strength or weakness of a president who tweets his grievances with Comey in Qatar. He's no longer a reality TV star, Commander-in-Chief of the United States instead. Today in the France 24 debate, Comey testifies with us. He's a former federal prosecutor who teaches at Harvard Law School. Alex Whiting, visiting fellow at the American University of Paris. Welcome back.
Thank you. Good.
Welcome from New York to political consultant Harlan Hill. From Fort Lauderdale in Florida, attorney and Republican Party strategist Ed Pozzuoli. Welcome to the show. And for the long view on what it all means for the United States going forward, philosopher Gabriel Rockhill. He's the author of Counter History of the President.
Of the present.
Of the present. Excuse me, the present. Counter History of the Present. The France 24 debate on Facebook and on Twitter, the hashtag F24debate. There were lines down the block outside the Capitol, offices in the United States in slowdown mode, Americans stopping to watch James Comey's testimony, much in the way they did when the Watergate hearings were on. The former FBI director telling senators he perceived Trump's request to drop the Flynn probe as an order, and recalled the tone of the 9 conversations he'd had with Donald Trump.
Flynn had been forced to resign the day before. On the 14th, the president makes specific reference to that. And so that's why I understood him to be saying that what he wanted me to do was drop any investigation connected to Flynn's account of his conversations with the Russians. I was so stunned by the conversation that I just took it in. And the only thing I could think to say, because I was playing in my mind, because I was going to remember every word he said, I was playing in my mind, what should my response be? And that's why I very carefully chose the words. And look, I've seen the tweet about tapes. Lordy, I hope they're tapes. I remember saying, I agree he's a good guy, as a way of saying I'm not agreeing with what you just asked me to do.
Alex Whiting, he went further than what he wrote in written testimony on the eve of this hearing. Is there a smoking gun in what the fired director of the FBI said about Donald Trump pressuring him?
I think there is, and you're right. He did go further. I think it's important to remember that we have 2 different parallel narratives here that we have to pay attention to. One is the question of whether crimes were committed, and then the other is a broader narrative about whether he abused power, whether he is violated norms that we respect in our government. With respect to the criminal side, I think the smoking gun was the point that you referred to in the opening, which is that Comey said that he understood that request on February 14th to drop the Flynn investigation to be a directive or an order. And that really constitutes, that reaches the level of obstruction of justice. I think that when you put together the written testimony from Comey and his oral testimony today, he has made out a case, a prima facie case of obstruction of justice.
All right, let's listen more to what Comey said. He told the senators that Mike Flynn was in legal jeopardy, that yes, the Russians are involved, and yes, he has the sense he was fired, quote, to change the way the Russia investigation was being conducted?
I just remembered sitting here, a third one. When you've seen the picture of me walking across the blue room, and what the president whispered in my ear was, "I really look forward to working with you." The next Friday, I have dinner, and the president begins by wanting to talk about my job. And so I'm sitting there thinking, wait a minute, 3 times you've already asked me to stay or talked about me staying. My common sense, again, I could be wrong, but my common sense told me what's going on here is he's looking to get something in exchange for granting my request to stay in the job.
Ed Pozzuoli, your reaction to what we've heard there from James Comey about Donald Trump, you know, as the commander-in-chief, the president of the United States, putting pressure on the FBI director?
No, you know, what we heard was ammunition for Donald Trump's political opponents. But as a lawyer, I understand what obstruction of justice is, and this is not obstruction of justice. So what we did learn, though, is a couple things. That there was an affirmation by James Comey that President Trump is not under investigation, that there's been no evidence whatsoever of any that supports the collusion claim between Trump campaign and Russians or Russian operatives. And what's even more important to me is that none of those things, I'll share with you, I think what the president did may be inappropriate, but criminal obstruction of justice, absolutely not. And in fact, some of the things that did concern me was that James Comey did admit to leaking out a memo. Again, this goes back to kind of the mindset that the Trump administration has been subjected to about people being able to leak out whatever they want out of the U.S. government, with both weakens Donald Trump as president and tries to undermine him, but also weakens the U.S. government entirely. And that is not something that we want at all. And in fact, Senator Marco Rubio said the only thing that wasn't leaked out was the fact that Donald Trump wasn't under investigation at all. So I find it just fascinating that there's a lot of smoke, but there's no there in that case. Sorry, I just don't see it.
I have to disagree with Ed. As a lawyer and a former prosecutor, I think it is a prima facie case of obstruction of justice. The statute 18 U.S.C. 1512 makes it a crime to corruptly impede a federal proceeding, here either an investigation or the impending grand jury investigation. And there's no clearer way to impede an investigation than to give a directive to stop that investigation. And it's clear that the president, his intent there in giving that directive, that order to...
Is it an order? He says, I hope you can see your way clear to letting this go. Is that an order?
As Comey explained, he didn't use the words order, but the president of the United States doesn't need to do that. He clears the room out of anybody else, including the attorney general and the vice president, which is already suspicious. And then he says, I hope you can find your way to letting this go. That's clear. That context, the circumstances, as Comey explained, that was understood as an order, and I have to believe the evidence suggests that that was intended as an order. That's what the president wanted. And imagine if Comey had complied with that order. Imagine if he had dropped the investigation on the request of the president. We would certainly feel like that investigation had been obstructed.
Ed Pozzuoli, under Barack Obama, James Comey had 2 conversations with the president. Under Donald Trump, and remember, Comey was only FBI director from January to May, it was 9 conversations. What does that tell you?
Yeah, but what it tells me is an example under Obama. President Obama had Loretta Lynch direct James Comey to drop the investigation under the Clinton email scam. That's what we heard today. So look, let me go back to what was said about Donald Trump. As president, constitutionally, he could in fact direct the director of the FBI to prosecute or not prosecute anyone in particular if he so chose. Would that be appropriate? No, but constitutionally he could. In this case, he did not direct him. And how do we know this? We can have all the supposition in the world about what the intent was and how James Comey took it, whatever. But we do know the following. It did not impact the continuation of the investigation of Michael Flynn. And the investigation continues to go on today of Michael Flynn. And so to whatever degree, now I will share that if you got a directive from the President of the United States, there were 2 or 3 choices James Comey had. If that were truly a directive, one would be to resign. 2 would be to report it to either the Attorney General or to somebody else, 3, which he didn't. And 3 would be to do what he directed. So we know he didn't derail the investigation of Mike Flynn, 1. 2, he didn't report it to anybody. And clearly he didn't resign. All of those 3 are clear indications that at the time, James Comey did not take what the president said as a directive. That is prima facie, in my view, indicia of how James Comey took the conversation with President Trump.
All right, let me give you one political reaction here, Ed. It's from the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Paul Ryan, telling reporters at a news conference, Donald Trump is new in government, and so therefore I think he's learning as he goes. I'm not saying it's an acceptable excuse. It's just my observation. Is it an acceptable excuse to being new at the job?
No. What I would suggest to you, it explains some of what I would consider to be inappropriate behavior. The conversation to have with James Comey one-on-one is probably inappropriate. It's not illegal, but it's inappropriate. And I think that is what I believe Paul Ryan, that's how I would apply Paul Ryan's statement. I believe that's the case there.
I think
that's how I would react.
Gabriel Rockhill.
Well, I think that we also have to discuss plausible deniability and how it operates in the current political context, and particularly with the power elite. And a statement like this made in the context that Alex highlighted earlier clearly points to the extent to which Trump wanted to work at 2 levels at the same time, to communicate something while also being able to plausibly deny what he has communicated. And this has a long-standing rhetorical history in the U.S. government, as well as in the Secret Services. And so we can't simply take these types of statements at face value. We have to situate them precisely within these contexts and understand that power brokers who want to exercise that power and not be accountable will always speak in tongues, because this is how they communicate to their minions what it is that they are to do, and for which they do not themselves want to be held accountable.
And to Ed's point that James Comey shouldn't be leaking stuff and shouldn't have a friend leak stuff that the president said to him. He dutifully wrote down everything every time he came out of those meetings with the U.S. president. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that the case of what's referred to as leaking, we could also refer to it as whistleblowing, really depends on the particular context, and that there is information about particular governmental decisions and encounters that the general public has a right to know. And if the U.S. president is encouraging certain types of actions, then we should have the right to have access to that information so that our governmental officials can be held accountable.
He used the word disturbing very often in his testimony, James Comey, saying that there were disturbing, I don't have the exact quote in front of my eyes right now, but disturbing things that he heard from Donald Trump, and that's why he wrote this stuff down. Do you agree with Ed when he says he shouldn't have had a friend leak what happened?
The leak, that's a red herring, because a leak is usually of classified information or confidential information. This was not classified. In fact, he was testifying about it publicly today. And Donald Trump himself put the subject of his interactions with Comey on the table when he fired Comey. So he gave an advance copy of this to the media, but there's nothing improper about sharing this information. Comey knows the rules about classified information better than anybody, and so that's just a kind of false sideshow. You know, I think that the point about disturbing, That's an important point, and that was an important thing that that Comey said today, because it gave some weight to the words that were released yesterday, and it made us understand. It put us in the room, made us understand how he felt and how grave and serious this was. And we have kind of gotten used to things with Donald Trump, and our expectations have been lowered. And Comey today reminded us that this was very serious. This was really grave.
All right, when we come back, we're going to pick up on that point and also ask what happens to the institution of the President of the United States, what happens to the Trump presidency going forward. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.